Most people grow up believing the economic system exists to help them become free. Freedom of time, freedom of income, freedom to decide how life unfolds. But large systems rarely organize themselves around individual freedom. They organize themselves around stability. Stability keeps institutions functioning. It allows governments to plan long-term budgets. It allows corporations to project demand years into the future. It allows financial institutions to measure risk with reasonable confidence. Without stability, coordination collapses. Markets become unpredictable. Investment slows. Economic activity begins to fracture. For a system managing millions of people and trillions of dollars, unpredictability is dangerous. So the system naturally encourages patterns that are stable and repeatable. Predictable education paths, predictable employment, predictable income streams. When millions of people move through the same financial stages, the entire economy becomes easier to model. Employers understand labor supply. Banks understand borrower behavior. Governments understand tax revenue. Everything becomes forecastable, and forecastability is the foundation of stability. This is why the dominant financial path looks almost identical across societies. Study, work, earn a salary, spend most of that income on housing, goods, and services. The money moves through the economy in steady, understandable flows. Income enters the system through wages. Consumption redistributes that income through businesses. Taxes move portions of it through government programs. Every step reinforces the same financial rhythm. Work produces income, income fuels spending, spending sustains the economy. From the system's perspective, this pattern works extremely well. It produces stability across decades. Businesses grow. Institutions remain predictable. Financial markets continue functioning. But a system designed for stability does not necessarily optimize for freedom, because freedom introduces deviation. Deviation introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty disrupts the patterns the system depends on. This does not mean the system is malicious. It means the system has priorities. Its primary goal is not to maximize individual independence. Its primary goal is to keep the economic machine running smoothly. Once that becomes clear, the structure begins to look different. The traditional path is not necessarily designed to lead people out of the system. It is designed to keep the system stable. And stability always favors predictable movement over independent deviation. Stability requires something very specific: predictable behavior. Large economic systems cannot function smoothly if millions of people constantly move in unpredictable directions. Markets rely on expectations. Governments rely on forecasts. Corporations rely on demand projections. If those patterns suddenly became chaotic, planning would collapse, investment would slow, institutions would struggle to measure risk. So, over time, economic structures begin to encourage behavior that is easy to anticipate, not through strict commands, but through incentives. Consider how income is typically earned: a stable job, a consistent salary, regular pay cycles that arrive every 2 weeks. This kind of income is extremely valuable to institutions. Banks understand it, employers rely on it, governments can tax it efficiently. Predictable income produces predictable financial flows. Mortgage payments arrive on schedule. Consumer spending follows stable patterns. Savings accumulate gradually over time. All of this makes the system easier to manage. When millions of people behave in similar financial ways, the economy becomes measurable, forecastable, governable. Employers can estimate how large their workforce should be. Banks can determine how much credit they can safely issue. Governments can predict future tax revenue. Everything begins to operate with a sense of order, and that order becomes the foundation of stability. This is why the most encouraged financial path tends to look very similar across societies: education, employment, income, consumption, saving. Each step produces predictable flows of money through the system. Income enters through wages. Expenses move that income through businesses. Businesses use revenue to pay workers and expand operations. The cycle repeats across millions of households, and the repetition keeps the machine running smoothly. From the perspective of institutions, this pattern is extremely valuable because it allows the system to continue operating across decades without constant disruption. But predictable participation creates an unintended consequence. It quietly limits deviation, and deviation is where many forms of financial independence begin. Entrepreneurship introduces uncertainty. Ownership produces uneven outcomes. Investment returns fluctuate. These paths do not move in predictable patterns. Some people succeed dramatically. Others fail completely. From the system's perspective, that unpredictability introduces volatility. Volatility is difficult to forecast, difficult to regulate, difficult to stabilize. So the dominant economic path rarely emphasizes deviation. Instead, it emphasizes reliability. Work consistently, earn steadily, spend responsibly. These behaviors keep financial flows stable. They allow institutions to continue coordinating the movement of money across the entire economy. And the more people follow that predictable path, the more stable the system becomes. Most content talks at you. This one sits with you. If that difference stood out, if this felt real instead of loud, like the video, subscribe. This channel is built for people who notice patterns. Once stability becomes the priority, the system begins shaping incentives around it. Not through obvious commands, not through strict rules written in plain language, but through structures that quietly reward certain financial behaviors while discouraging others. Consider how most people are introduced to money. The message is simple: study, find stable employment, earn a reliable income. This sequence appears logical. Education increases skills. Skills lead to employment. Employment produces income. But this sequence also produces something else: predictable participation. A predictable worker earns a predictable salary. That salary produces predictable spending. Predictable spending supports predictable business revenue. The entire system begins to operate like a coordinated rhythm. Workers earn. Businesses receive income. Institutions recycle capital through lending and investment. This rhythm allows the economy to remain stable across millions of individuals, each person following roughly the same financial pattern. But once ownership enters the picture, that rhythm begins to change. Ownership does not follow predictable patterns. A business may grow rapidly. It may fail entirely. An investment may compound dramatically or remain stagnant for years. Ownership introduces uneven outcomes. Some individuals accumulate significant capital. Others experience losses. From the perspective of a large system, this uneven distribution introduces volatility. Volatility is difficult to forecast, difficult to regulate, difficult to stabilize, which is why ownership rarely appears as the first stage in the traditional financial path. Instead, it is positioned much later, after decades of participation in the system, after years of stable employment and gradual saving. Ownership becomes something that happens eventually, not something that begins immediately. This sequencing reinforces stability. Millions of workers earning salaries, millions of households spending income, millions of predictable financial flows circulating through the economy. From the system's perspective, this creates a reliable structure. Labor generates income. Income generates consumption. Consumption sustains businesses. Businesses expand and hire more workers. The cycle continues. Within this cycle, most individuals remain participants. They contribute labor. They earn wages. They circulate money through the system. Ownership changes that role. Ownership allows someone to benefit from the structure itself. Instead of only exchanging time for income, they hold assets that produce income, assets that grow while the system expands, assets that appreciate as markets develop, assets that generate returns without constant labor. The difference between these positions is subtle but powerful. One role sustains the system, the other begins to extract value from it. And systems designed around stability naturally guide most people toward the role that keeps the machine running smoothly. Once the structure becomes visible, something important begins to change. The system stops looking like a ladder designed for individual freedom and starts looking more like an engine designed for continuity. Large economic systems cannot prioritize millions of individual outcomes at the same time. What they can prioritize is stability, predictable movement, reliable financial flows. When millions of people move through the same economic path, the machine continues operating. Workers earn income. Businesses collect revenue. Governments collect taxes. Financial institutions recycle capital through lending and investment. The entire structure begins to function like a coordinated loop. Income enters the system through labor. Consumption redistributes that income through businesses. Businesses generate profits and expand operations. Expansion creates new employment. Employment produces new income, and the cycle repeats again. From the system's perspective, this loop works extremely well. It maintains order. It keeps capital circulating. It allows institutions to plan decades into the future. But stability and freedom do not always move in the same direction, because freedom introduces deviation. Deviation disrupts patterns, and patterns are what keep the system stable. When someone begins to step outside the predictable path, uncertainty appears. Income becomes less predictable. Results become uneven. Outcomes become difficult to forecast. Entrepreneurship introduces risk. Ownership produces uneven financial outcomes. Investment returns fluctuate over time. Some individuals accumulate large amounts of capital. Others experience failure. From the perspective of a large system, this kind of volatility is difficult to control. So the dominant economic narrative continues emphasizing the path that preserves stability: education, employment, income, consumption. None of these stages are inherently wrong. They produce comfort, security, predictable financial movement. But they are primarily designed to keep the system functioning smoothly, not necessarily to maximize individual independence. Freedom often appears in different positions within the system: positions connected to ownership, positions connected to leverage, positions connected to assets that continue producing value beyond labor. Those positions introduce uncertainty, but they also introduce independence. And once this difference becomes visible, the system begins to look less mysterious. It simply reveals its priorities. A structure designed to maintain stability across millions of lives. Even if freedom requires stepping outside the path that stability depends on. If this shifted how you see the system, subscribe. Like this if it clarified something.